Welcome. You're watching the next webinar on documentary business. Peter Hamilton, our astute founder, is unable to be with us today as he's preparing for his trip to Australia and down under, continuing to cover the global business of television with a little recreation on the side. My name is Dan Salerno. I'm a senior consultant and veteran from Discovery, National Geographic, BBC, and a few other locations. I'm going to step in for Peter today as a guest host, and I'd like to welcome our two guests today, Liz Levinson from Cactus Tree Entertainment and Katie Thorogood from True North. Today, we're going to talk about the first conferences of the new year, 2024. Once again, documentary business is on the road. 3 conferences really kicked off the year. NATPE, of course, in Miami, Content Americas, the very next week in Miami, and then Realscreen, most recently in New Orleans. Liz attended NATPE and is here to report back on what her experiences were. And Katie went to Realscreen and is going to do the same. Unfortunately, we're unable to pick up a colleague of mine for Content Americas, but we'll try to touch on that throughout the conversation. So welcome to the discussion. Let's jump right in. Liz is the president of Cactus Tree Entertainment based out of Los Angeles. Welcome to the webinar.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Peter. Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this because, Dan, you and I, and I'm looking forward to chatting with Katie too. We have these conversations and sort of recap what we've thought about various markets, what's going on in the state of the business. So I'm looking forward to doing it in this venue.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it is kind of fun, right? I always say that we're doing these and all we're doing is hitting record is the big difference. And, maybe we're not walking the dog at the same time,
Yes.
but that's okay. Well, Liz, tell us a little bit about Cactus Tree, and then more important, your decision to go to NATPE and some of your early thoughts on it. And then we'll get into some of the more specific points a little later in the convo.
Sure, absolutely. Cactus Tree Entertainment has been around for about 8 years now. We specialize in working with distributors and content holders on co-productions, international development opportunities, international distribution. So we do a lot of consulting on behalf of clients, and we also work to put together independent productions and financing with various networks around the world. In the last couple of years, we were the EPs of a show called My Name is Riva that we did with MultiChoice in Africa, several documentaries that we did in cooperation with ZDF out of Germany. And I also work very closely with GRB Media Ranch here in LA on the international distribution side. So that's sort of the background. In terms of deciding to go to NATPE, I will date myself here. NATPE was the very first conference that I went to when I was a little baby executive. I think my first market was 2006 or 2007, back when it was in Las Vegas. And it was a very different market back then. And I had been curious, and I've gone to NATPE many times when it was in Vegas, and then when it was in Miami. Obviously, the last couple of years, because of COVID, put a little bit of a damper on international travel. There were several years that it was canceled. So I was very much looking forward to going back now that Brunico took over NATPE, to see what changes had been made, to see if the market itself would have a different vibe now that it was considered NATPE global. And I'll tell you, it definitely felt different. NATPE has changed a lot since the last 15 years of the business. The state of the business is very different. And I think it was reflected in the decision by Brunico, first of all, to take it over, continue to hold it in Miami, but also change the scope. So NATPE traditionally had gone from very much a broadcast sort of gathering. So it was distributors, it was rights holders, it was a lot of platforms back when it was in Vegas. Then it shifted very specifically to be a Latin American market. So it was very much Latin American content, Latin American buyers. And when I was selling to Latin America, that was the place to be. Now that it's NATPE Global, I'd say it's almost like a mix. So there was a very heavy Latin American presence in terms of buyers. But I also think a lot of them may have also been in town because they were doing Content Americas, which was also in Miami, just down the street a few days later. NATPE this year had sort of a focus on a lot of fast channels. So it felt like this very interesting combination of the traditional Latin American market with a little bit of like that old element of the broadcast platforms wrapped into it.
Can I ask a question, Liz? I've been to NATPE once, about 20 years ago, wide-eyed. It was a period of time at Discovery where you could fly Virgin upper class. I couldn't, a limo came and picked me up from East London. It was a one time in a life experience. And Vegas was like, you know, the whole thing was, and NATPE was, as I expected, like MIP and MIPCOM with huge stands, and it really felt like people were putting on a show. Whereas Realscreen, having just gone to Realscreen, is sort of a little bit more like the Edinburgh TV Festival in the UK, where it's less. Is NATPE still that big kind of big stand with the biggest kids in town? We've got the biggest stand thing, or is it completely different to 20 years ago?
Completely different. It reminds me much more of what Realscreen has been. And I didn't go to Realscreen this year, but I've been many times in the past. It was very much that conference feel versus a market trade floor. And definitely fewer people dressed in crazy outfits who have come to pitch you a show. I mean, I don't know if you remember that from those days of NATPE, but there always used to be like a lot of independent producers who would turn up, usually in like wacky outfits. My friend was telling me about one time she remembered someone brought a kangaroo, and there was like a kangaroo hopping down the aisles at NATPE, because people would come with show ideas, and that was really like a place where they could get FaceTime in front of broadcasters and distributors. That feeling has kind of gone. There is an element of pitching original shows, and that's something that I think we'll talk about a little bit more as we dive into this a little bit more deeply. But it's not, there's very few actual stands. There was a small little market floor that had a few stands in it. Some of the bigger companies took meetings up in suites. That was actually a much better scenario than NATPE was back in Miami, because back in Miami, there were a lot of issues with the elevators. People would miss meetings because they were running late. This one felt a lot smaller and a lot more accessible, but very much conference-like.
Mm. Well, let's switch over to Katie, although you've sort of introduced yourself with some questions there. But let's do a proper introduction. Katie Thorogood is the Chief Creative Officer for True North, a production company based in Leeds in the UK. Katie, why don't you tell us a little bit about sort of your background and why you felt you really wanted to sort of make this first trip, I guess, as True North to the Realscreen conference as a UK independent.
Yeah, well, so I've been at True North for a year. True North is a mid-sized company in the UK. We do a lot of lifestyle for Channel 4 in the daytime. We do a lot of crime, and we do docs. And we're based out of London, and even though that's not significant for you guys, for us that's a big point of difference in the UK, because a lot of spend is meant to be going out of London, and I mean, everyone knows that the market in the UK is going through a tricky time, a challenging time. So the ad downturn has had a big effect on Channel 4, have slowed down commissioning. Channel 5 not commissioning so much stuff. The BBC license fee held firm, and I think the BBC at the moment has a lot of there's not much space to get in anywhere, because it's had a lot of successful formats recently. So it's essentially you're kind of looking at where else the opportunities are. We've got a couple of really interesting crime formats, and so for me, I wanted to go and test the water at Realscreen. And I've been once before when previous company I was at, Ricochet, and it was owned by Warner Brothers, but it was a real, like, we flew in, we had a couple of meetings, and we had a dinner with our Warner Brothers colleagues, and it was sort of that rather than in their pitching. And for me, Realscreen's that it does feel more like the UK's Edinburgh TV Festival in terms of a connecting networking event. But at Edinburgh, there's this sort of thing where you have meetings, but you're not really, it's not a pitching conference. So it's kind of hard. I like the transparency of Realscreen, where you go and you're expected to pitch. That's sort of the point. So for me, it was the start of making relationships, I would say.
Yeah, and I was going to sort of focus your role is, and not to bury the lead, you were being a little modest in your introduction. I do want to emphasize that True North has the #1 show on daytime on Channel 4, which is
Yep.
no small accomplishment. Give yourself a pat on the back for that. But one of the things that I thought was interesting about your experience at Realscreen is that as a veteran of the industry, you
An old bird.
I would never use that phrase. But you know the global marketplace, and yet as True North has been largely focused in the UK, and this was an opportunity for you to introduce the True North brand and capabilities to a wider marketplace. Do you feel that Realscreen gave you the opportunity as a production company to do that as much as you had expected?
Yeah, very much so. And I would say actually for me, I haven't been in the global marketplace for a long time, because after I left, I used to work at Discovery. Well, after I left Discovery last time, I went to a British production company. Again, we mainly were in the UK. And then ITV, where you're really not looking outside very much in my time there. And then at Ricochet, when you're owned by Warner Brothers have the US relationships. So for me, as well as for True North, I wanted to put my head above the parapet and kind of build those relationships again. So for me, what's lovely is, even though they don't know me from Adam and they don't know True North from Adam, there is an absolute willingness. Come talk to us. We don't know where ideas are going to come from. For us buttoned up Brits, that's kind of weird. In a lovely, lovely, lovely way. I think it would be harder for a production company that people don't know to get meetings with UK commissioning editors.
Were the people you met with at Realscreen on the network side, were they expecting you to come and talk about co-productions and bringing a UK platform to the table as well, or were they open to it being, a straight commission if there was a show that worked for them?
I don't know what their expectations were, but we weren't talking to them about co-productions, because we weren't taking that high-end co-production ideas. We were taking crime series, which would be long-running crime scenes, which would have to have American stories, so it wouldn't be a co-production. And then with our lifestyle, we film all our lives. We film so much of it across Europe. So I just really wanted. We might have 15 teams out in shooting across Europe at any one time. And I really wanted to see what the appetite was for, because we get American contributors applying to us all the time. What would be the appetite in the States for doing something with American contributors, but based in Europe? So they were the two things that I kind of wanted to find out. And I think what we're going to do is we want to follow up with a couple of people and go to New York and LA and just follow up, because even though everyone says do it on Zoom, because we come from not having a relationship at all, you kind of feel like you want to sit around a table and get to know people better. But that, I know that's really old school of me. And as Danny said, I'm an old bird. So,
I don't know. I totally agree with that. And I feel like what we're kind of, speaking of burying the lead, the whole reason to go to these conferences is to get that FaceTime with people. I know a lot of people have said to me, oh, there's no reason to spend thousands of dollars to go to a conference if you can just meet people on Zoom, but it definitely is not the same. Yeah.
Even for me, hanging out with the British producers and asking them what their, if I haven't made anything in the States, finding out from my peers, how do they do it? What are their relationships are like? What is it like actually making something for a US broadcaster when you're based in the UK? That was as invaluable as meeting the US broadcasters. And New Orleans is a lot of fun as well.
When Katie, now I know you had a pretty good success track record in picking up meetings with some of the key brands, some of the larger brands that were attending at Realscreen. I know Liz is kind of went at NATPE. I mean, how were some of the major brands as represented at a NATPE, given it was a heavily Latin American focused market? Content Americas is, of course, right around the corner, so you might have sort of a split set of attendance and attention. Were there opportunities there for producers and pitching projects and so forth at NATPE? similar to Realscreen, or a little bit different in your experience?
I would say it was different because there was such a conversation and lean toward new technology. Fast channels was a really big part of the conversation, sort of what the future of that looked like. A lot of the AVOD, the major like AVOD and fast channels were there. So, Pluto was there, Tubi was there. A lot of other brands that have launched fast channels or networks that have launched fast channels were there acquiring for those channels. So I would say that the opportunity that I saw at NATPE was more for rights holders who have content that's in the can already and they're looking to exploit it versus independent producers who are looking to get a show commissioned. That's where I think the real value was. And a big part of the reason that I was there was to talk about completed shows and that acquisition cycle, especially now with Fast.
And the sort of the question that producers are obviously interested in. Did you feel was there any discussion about if or when some of these fasts and AVODs might start to open up the checkbook for original productions, or do you think this is still going to be mostly a catalog-based business for the foreseeable future?
You know what's interesting about that? I think that there was some conversation about that. I think it's inevitable that the right now the fast market's incredibly crowded. There are so many channels, there are so many platforms that are launching. I got the sense, just listening to a couple of the panels at NATPE, that bubble will burst eventually. No one knows exactly what that will look like, but the only differentiating factor then for platforms like fast channels is going to be original series. So we're sort of looking at this weird cycle where all these fast channels launched, everything was about being non-exclusive and giving your content to as many platforms as possible. I see that kind of changing back a little bit. Some of the fast channels were talking about how to have more targeted advertising. So essentially they're rebuilding the linear television model. They're just rebuilding it on the internet. And the thing that gets people subscribing and, continuously watching ads is original series that you can't get anywhere else. So I think, there are opportunities for producers on the original side. I think we might be on the verge of that starting to happen. But right now for this year with what I saw at NATPE, it was very specifically for rights holders. And that being said, part of the other reason that I was at NATPE is that I was on a panel for an unscripted pitching competition. So I was one of the judges of the panel. So people did come in with their original shows and original format. So it's not that NATPE is excluding independent producers or original creations. They're not. It just felt that it wasn't the majority of the conversations that were happening.
And Katie, you may not have sort of run into this because Realscreen can sort of work on many different levels and so forth. But likewise, did you see or feel that fast channels and AVOD channels were part of the discussion at Realscreen in the hallways that you were walking, or the panels you may have seen on the agenda? Or was it a little bit more in the background?
I didn't pick up that. I didn't pick that up, but then I probably wasn't, I didn't have my antenna eye up for it. I did anecdotally, a few people said to me, there aren't as many commissioning editors for original content here as there usually are, but I have no frame of reference to compare it to other years. But anecdotally, I was picking that up. And a lot of people saying, because we've all learned how to do Zoom now, rather than other reasons.
Yeah, that is I think it's one of the recurring themes that I've picked up on in some of the follow-up conversations in the trades, and just, as we all talk with friends and family who are sort of wandering around the globe at these various conferences and so forth, that I think it is an interesting question I think the value of these conferences, in addition to being in person, as Liz noted, it also still comes down to sort of an ROI for the independent producers that are there. They still have to find value in it. And of course, the greatest value you find if there are actual commissioning editors there, in the British term, or just, network executives in the American terms. It sounds like brands were represented rather extensively, but not necessarily the decision makers in each instance. Is that an accurate statement, or do you think you had a different experience?
I think for me, the lifestyle channels and crime channels, I think they were there. I think they were there. You know, Lifetime was there. Magnolia wasn't. HGTV, I don't think went. I'm trying to think.
Oxygen, you think, I believe was there.
Oxygen was there. A&E was there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I
Yeah,
mean,
and you've you know, you've hit on the, you know, you talked about the true crime genre, which you know, every time we talk about how challenging the world is becoming and what's going well, true crime tends to be the answer. And I know that you know, you've been developing a number of ideas. True North has had some experience with true crime content in the UK. What was true crime kind of the theme of almost every conversation? I feel like even networks that aren't involved in true crime are dipping their toe into the genre.
they were only the themes of the conversation for the ones that we were talking to about it. So I would say that we were the ones that brought it up, rather than them. But yeah, it is, and it's lovely to see as well how many British producers are making crime in the US. So it feels like an opportunity. It feels to me like the American market is open for new entrants.
That's great. And you know, similarly, Liz, I know with, you know, My Name is Riva, is a little bit more substantive, but it's still sort of, you know, in a simple term, fits within the true crime genre and the appeal. Have
It
you
definitely does, but I will add, what's funny is that in some of the conversations that I had at NATPE, especially with Fast, a lot of it was a push for advertiser friendly, which traditionally true crime is not. So I almost wonder, you know, if that's sort of for Fast going to change a little bit of their direction. Because they do have to rely so heavily on the advertising that comes in versus the platforms that don't necessarily have to rely on advertising. They're more subscription based.
It is a great point. I will say, as somebody who has worked on the network side, within the genre long before the name rose up at Discovery, when we launched some of our early crime, and we used to refer to them as justice, you know, series to avoid the word.
That was never. Do you remember the period of time, Danny, where we weren't allowed to say history anymore because it was too old? We had to call it Exploring the Past.
Well, and it is true. Words matter, right? I mean, it's
That didn't last long,
educational
thank God.
you know, in nonfiction entertainment is much better sometimes than some of the other words. But you know, it's funny, advertisers, while they want to play it safe, ultimately want audiences. And if true crime can deliver audiences, the advertisers will be there. And I don't think we have to look any further than the success of Investigation Discovery, and then sort of all the progeny that comes from it. So
what learning for me, I think, which is obvious now I think of it, but which I hadn't realized before, is, and again, this might be anecdotal and it might not be true, but that sense that crime doesn't travel. The big feature length, the big specials, they travel. But your adjudicated long-running series, in America you want American stories, and in the UK we want British stories. We all want our own crime. We all want to and I'd assumed that there would be gaps for acquisitions, and I definitely noticed. I hadn't really thought that through, but that was something that I definitely picked up on.
Well, I think that sort of leads to the sort of the question that we all are hoping the answer is yes, but and I'm feeling, Katie, that you definitely got this out of Realscreen. And you know, 23 was tough, and in back part of 22, Peter and I have covered in several of our discussions some of the challenges the linear networks have faced, and we've even seen diminishing volume of commissions on some of the streamers in the nonfiction and the feature doc space. And there's a lot of reason to sort of be concerned about the genre that we all sort of live and work in. But 24 is always an opportunity for a fresh start when you hit January 1st. Do you feel that we're starting to see some of the light at the end of the tunnel in 24? Did you feel it at respectively NATPE and Realscreen that you went to? What at this point is the take from where you guys are sitting? And we'll start with Liz, maybe.
Well, NATPE, I felt seemed to be very optimistic. I think there was a lot of positivity. There's definitely this trend of the concept of, it's survive till 25, if we can all make it that far. But I think my biggest takeaway is that there's a lot of different business models that are out there. And I would encourage all producers to be exploring everything, because I think that diversification of business model is very, very important, especially in this environment.
And Katie, what was your take
Well,
in New Orleans?
it's hard for me to tell because I've got no point of reference from the year before. I would say it feels more upbeat than the UK, but I don't know whether that's just because we're all natural whingers. And it might be that. I mean, I am the eternal optimist because I've been through these downturns before, never one as bad as this in the UK. But in the end, they've got to have something to put on the telly. And I think what's happening in the UK is that everyone kind of wants, with the streamers, bigger, better, and that sort of, that bigger, better, fewer things is quite hard for a company like ours where we do serve the middle ground. But it felt like there's appetite for that long running show. I certainly felt it in the States, and I'm hoping it comes back in the UK.
Yeah, and I think one of the points you make there is one that I've sort of reminded myself quite often when you just look at statistics or you start looking at schedules and numbers, or the latest round of layoffs from somebody coming up. I'm also reminded just yesterday here, as of this recording, Disney announced its results with tremendous positivity, even heading towards profitability on the DTC side by the end of this year. Disney has also just announced this week their sort of earth-shattering agreement with both Fox and Warner Brothers on a combined sports streaming service, which maybe in a future webinar we can talk about what that means as the impact starts to be more realized with the details and so forth. But at the end of the day, they are not going to cut themselves to zero. There still needs to be a team large enough to get the job done, and they need content. Viewers still do need content, and while they may be right-sizing the ship a little bit, there's always going to be something out there. So hopefully the survive till 25 is a theme that I did hear a couple times as well, Liz, and hopefully it's not that dramatic. But well, as we thank you very much for both of you as we look to wrap up here. Any last quick takeaways that we did not mention that you want to highlight from your respective experiences? Katie, from Realscreen, anything you think we
I would say if you're going to Realscreen for the first time and you are starting relationships, so you don't know the people that you're meeting, wear bright colors, because then you text them and say, I'm the woman in the orange jumpsuit or red shirt, or that was a massive help. Definitely wear bright colors. But I would also say, like, for me, that was an invaluable 4 days of understanding the American market. I can read as much as I want in the trades over here, talking to people, but to actually go and immerse yourself in it. And yeah, I found the whole experience exhilarating, actually, because you come away feeling enthused and excited and stimulated and all of those things. And I saw a lot of good jazz.
Oh, well, great. And Liz, last final thoughts on NATPE?
Similar to what Katie was saying, I agree on the bright colors, but also, the value of developing relationships over the years cannot be overstated. So many of the great meetings I had at NATPE were because I have known people in this industry for a very long time. And it's seeing friends and wanting to do business with people that you know and you like. And there is no substitute. There is no Zoom call that will ever give you the opportunity to develop those relationships that is better than being in person with people experiencing, you know, a new city or a new location. And that's why, you know, at the end of the day, these markets are still happening. There's more markets than ever before. So clearly people keep going. Our industry keeps needing these gatherings because it's the foundation of how we all get business done.
Well, thank you guys very much. Liz Levinson from Cactus Tree Entertainment and Katie Thorogood from True North. Really enjoyed the conversation. Liz, I know you'll be going to MIP in a couple of months, so maybe we can do a bit of a sequel event and bring our coverage from Con as well. I'd like to also thank our producers, Caitlin Cooper and Grace Hamilton, who are a little behind the scenes, but heavily responsible for making some of the technology and everything flow so smoothly. So thank you to both of them. Thank you also to Peter, of course, who, as I said, was not able to be with us today as he's preparing for his journey to Australia and will be reporting back from down under very shortly. Thanks again for attending. Documentary Business is online. Please follow us on the web, and we look forward to seeing you again real soon. Take care.
Thanks, Danny. Bye.